Hi, the Archives of Warcraft is a series looking at aspects of vanilla dungeons still in the game today, but without the story that goes with them. In these videos we look at the lost story behind these features. If you want to see other videos in the series, click on the annotation here to view the playlist. In this episode, we're going to have a look at the Deadmines. If you were Alliance, as I was during vanilla, it was very likely that Deadmines was your first experience of content where a group was actually required. I didn't even know about tanks, DPS or healers, I just did what I did in solo play, but with 4 others doing likewise. Fortunately, the dungeon was straightforward enough for 5 people to all effectively be playing in their own bubble, with no coordination required beyond all being in roughly the same place at roughly the same time. So although the architecture of the Deadmines instance and surrounding area is pretty much unchanged, the bosses are largely completely different, with the slight exception that Cookie was always there, but generally an amusing distraction who could drop a mace in the form of a rolling pin and didn't fight from inside a cauldron. But before we get to the dungeon itself, I think we should really cover what the Defias Brotherhood are. This seems to have been lost in the narrative now. In the original storyline of Westfall and the Deadmines dungeon, the Defias were actually a fairly tragic group that you had some sympathy for. Unfortunately, since Cataclysm, the Westfall story is a cringeworthy pseudo-political message about the Second Iraq War, told with no subtlety whatsoever, and the Defias are allowed no measure of humanity at all, it seems. This makes them better as bad guys for those who'd like to see the world in black and white, I guess, but has lost a lot of its original appeal for me. So who are the Defias? Well, it all goes back to the wars between the Alliance and the Orcs. Yes, they call themselves the Horde, but they weren't quite the same fully fledged horde that we know them as now. The Orcs completely smashed Stormwind, and the remains of the kingdom, led by Lothar after the death of King Lane, fled north. After they were eventually victorious sometime later, and with Varian on the throne, Stormwind needed to be rebuilt. This required the efforts of many stonemasons and other artisans. With the work complete, the craftsmen awaited their payment, however they were refused, and so one of their number, Edwin Van Cleef, banded the workers together and rioted through Stormwind. Conflict claimed the life of the Queen, and Van Cleef eventually withdrew to the lands surrounding Stormwind and formed the Defias Brotherhood. They resorted to looting and banditry in order to raise the gold they felt they were owed. Eventually, of course, their numbers became swelled with brigands, footpads and assassins, rather than exclusively builders and engineers, as the organisation would have appealed to these outlaws and needed their help to carry out their tasks. This allowed you to spare them a measure of sympathy. They had clearly been wronged and deserved to be paid for their work. I'm not sure it was ever explained in detail why this occurred, other than it involved the Black Dragon Anixia in disguise as the noblewoman Lady Prestor and a group of other nobles trying to do the work on the cheap by bribing the leaders, including Van Cleef, to not make a fuss when the other workers were not paid. Of course, Van Cleef was having none of it. However, as wrongfully treated as they were now the enemies of the Alliance, and besides, they sometimes dropped loot when you killed them, so choosing sides was fairly easy. As with all dungeons at the time, you spent time gathering quests, which often came at the ends of chains in the surrounding zones. Some of these quests involved work in the area surrounding the instance itself, though few real traces remain as the team have just dumped in a load of refugees to fill out the place. The undead ghouls and skeletons that were needed for a quest are still there, as is Foreman Nettle Thistle. He's often worth a trip if you knew the way around the place, and many a group got lost going round in circles, but he could drop some blue items. I presume he still can. As for the dungeon itself, it now has the apparently whimsical CSI Dumbass squad at the entrance. The original dungeon had ogres, goblins and human miners, as it does now, although I don't recall any of the goblins wearing bunny costumes. The monkeys and random barrels of gunpowder didn't feature quite so prominently. The first boss was an ogre foreman before and now, it's just that it wasn't an ogre mage as it is now. There were also 2 adds, again like now, but these were stealth Defias as opposed to more easily pulled ogre bodyguards. Rather than Helix, the second boss was called Sneed, but it was still a goblin riding a thing, a shredder in the case of the vanilla version, and I don't even know what in the case of now, though the fight remained largely the same. The third boss is where things take a very different turn. It's still in the foundry area as it is now, but rather than a mechanical boss, this was simply a goblin. The goblins that you see fleeing the area in the updated version, I suppose would have been the trash from the vanilla dungeon. Instead, the actual boss was a goblin called Gilned, who could drop a ring, which was the cause of quite a few arguments. As it possessed both agility and intellect, this pretty much made it desirable for everyone. It's nice to see that the engineering crates remain though. Instead of a Worgen, the fourth boss was the very popular Mr. Smite, a Tauren now immortalised in a toy obtainable from Pandaland. It wasn't a difficult fight, but it could take a while due to his party trick of periodically stunning everyone in the group so he could change weapons in the crate behind him. After Mr. Smite, the first mate, it would be time to kill the captain himself. Captain Greenskin, though, he was no great problem. And then it'd be on to the last boss, or the last proper boss, Edwin Van Cleef himself. Now, I did mention that Cookie existed at the time. He could be found on the other side of the ship, patrolling just around where you jumped off to exit the dungeon. You'd always take him out. Apart from a popular wand for casters, I'm pretty sure he could also drop a pet on quite a small chance, and I recall there was a green quality one-handed mace that looked like a rolling pin that I absolutely kept killing this boss until I got. Oh, and if you're wondering why there's a giant ship under the hills of Westfall, that's Van Cleef's secret weapon. He was building an ogre warship to assault Stormwind with. So that's the story of the Deadmines as it was during vanilla time. I hope you've enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to like, comment and subscribe, and share it with others who might also appreciate it. And until next time, I'll see you later.